this was about as bizarre and as easy as it gets.
So the number for me was a number that would allow me to never have to work again.
I feel like we got top.
I went from a sale of $500,000 to in debt.
$192 million.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warlow.
So what's your biggest question when it comes to selling your company? When I ask that question of other entrepreneurs, I hear things like, how do I avoid an earnout? When's the best time to sell? How do I create a bidding war? These questions, along with many others, inspired me to write the book, The Art of Selling Your Business. It's a field guide for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. I've taken all the best practices from the 300 plus interviews I've done for this show and distilled them down into an action plan for you. You can get it along with some gifts from my listeners when you go to builttosell.com/selling. Welcome to another edition of Built to Sell Radio. This one is a little different. It is Built to Sell Intel, where we unpack 4 of the most recent stories I've heard on the show and tease out some cool insights for you. Hopefully some transferable things. And my co-host and partner in crime, Jeremy Weisz from Rise 25, is going to lead our session today. Jeremy has done thousands of interviews with entrepreneurs and is well suited to lead this conversation. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you for having me. And I'm excited because this is the recap of the biggest takeaways from the month from Built to Sell Radio. And John, you're going to overlay your thoughts and advice, which I'm excited to hear because you do a great job asking the questions and listening, but everyone, myself included, want to hear your thoughts overlaid on these episodes. If you don't know John Warlow is the founder of the Value Builder System. It's a simple software for building the value of a company used by thousands of businesses worldwide, and the system incorporates several diagnostic tools, including the Value Builder Score, and it's offered by the global network of your independent advisors, the certified value builders. And John, I want to point one thing out, which is those businesses that achieve a Value Builder Score of 90 or greater are worth double the average performing business. So people should check out Built to Sell. They can fill out their score there, and you can check out his best-selling books, Built to Sell, and obviously the Built to Sell Radio, which is ranked by Forbes as one of the world's top 10 best podcasts for business owners, The Automated Customer, and The Art of Selling, all of those. And he's going to overlay all of those things on this episode today. But if you have questions or you want to check out more, go to builttosell.com or builttosell.com/radio. The first one, John, is Ben Leonard. Okay, so Ben Leonard is kind of a sad story to start. He had a heart problem in his 20s, and his doctor said you can't work out. So he cleared out his gym bag. He noticed some of the accessories were worn out prematurely, and this sparked his idea. And he borrowed $1,000 from his dad, ordered 250 skipping ropes with the Beast Gear logo on it, and 3 years later, he turned that over into a $4 million business, 95% which was on Amazon. So I love for you to talk about what your thoughts and likes about Ben's story.
Man, there's so much to like in this story. And, one of the interesting things about Ben is, first of all, he's a young guy. As you described, he went through this terrible episode with a heart condition. He's fine now, by the way. But it did trigger this idea. And so one of the things that struck me is how much of a guerrilla marketer Ben is and just how scrappy he was in the beginning. And I'm reminded of the story he shared on the episode where he talked about how he would get people to tag Beast Gear, which was the name of his company, on Instagram when they were using his gear to achieve something extraordinary, like a personal best in some squat or bench press or whatever. And if they tagged Beast Gear, Ben would reach out to them directly, personally. First of all, he'd like the post on Instagram. Not surprisingly, he'd comment saying like, "Great lift," but then he would then look at the person's profile and try to find something kind of noteworthy about the person who had the personal best. And then he would private message them. And he would say, amazing job on your lift. It's great to see. And he would kind of try to draw something out of his personal profile. And then he'd build up a bit of a dialogue with this person. And then eventually he would say, listen, it would mean the world to me if you'd consider reviewing us on Amazon. And of course, that's how we built up incredible 5-star ratings on Amazon. And I asked him what was going into that sort of idea, and he was like, like Nike and Reebok are not doing that, right? They've got a marketing director who has a whole team of marketing managers and marketing coordinators, and all of them think they are, God's gift. And nobody has the scrappiness to really get into the trenches and do that kind of blocking and tackling, but he did it. And it was a huge, differentiator for his brand, and enabled him to create this incredible 5-star following on Amazon, which, as you said in the introduction, led to kind of a huge channel for him. Like, not more than 90% of his sales were on Amazon.
Stuff that ends up not scaling ends up scaling eventually, right? Because, just that foot on the ground. There was another part, John, that you were digging into with him, which he was up against a behemoth in the space, and there was a protection thing. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on, you were asking the questions, and he had a patent in place, and what your thoughts when he was kind of sharing that story about he had to kind of go head to head with a behemoth.
Yeah, it's tricky, because as entrepreneurs, I think one of the things we always think about is we have this really unique idea, right? And we got to patent it or trademark it or protect it in some way. And I think we can spend a lot of cycles doing that, and until the product or service or idea or name has any traction, it's really not worth protecting. And yet he did have some traction, and when he was accused of using someone else's IP, he defended himself, and he hired a very fancy lawyer, and ultimately was successful. I think there's a delicate balance here between thinking about what you need to protect and not getting obsessed around protecting intellectual property that is never going to see the light of day. I'm reminded of Shipper Bee, one of the episodes we talked about last time. Jim really protected the methodology he used. If you can't remember the episode, Jim Instill built out a kind of an Uber for your packages, right? Like you could use a mobile app to order up a package to be shipped. And he built this kind of Shipper Bee hives technology where he had these hives in place all around the Southern Ontario. And he protected that idea. And it turned out that he spent more than $1 million protecting that idea. And it ultimately was one of the things that gave him what we call at Valuable monopoly control, kind of a protected idea. But again, if you spend too much time with lawyers protecting ideas that are never going to see the light of day, it can kill an idea before it ever gains traction. So I don't know that I have any intelligent advice for entrepreneurs on this point, just knowing that I think it takes a bit of intuition and maybe a bit of common sense to know, hey, this is something that's differentiating for us. We're not going to go away from this anytime soon. We better protect this name, this brand, this trademark, whatever.
Yeah, you're saying, keep it on the roadmap, and when you get enough traction, you may not want to do that from the get-go, especially if, you have a limited amount of cash to do it. In the case of Shipper Bee, he had some backing, he had his own personal funds, so he can kind of risk that if he wanted to. But in this case, Ben was really bootstrapping this business and parlaying it.
Yeah, I mean, the classic sort of, it's a bit of a cliche, but every young entrepreneur thinks, oh, I've got a brilliant idea. I don't want to tell you the idea, so can you sign this non-disclosure agreement? And then I'll tell you what the idea is. Investors hate signing NDAs because then it opens up to liability. And so as a result, it kind of kills the idea before it even can gain traction. And of course, the ultimate protection for your idea is going to be customer loyalty, right? I mean, when we talk about monopoly control as one of the 8 drivers, we talk about this idea that when customers prefer your product, your service, your brand, it gives you pricing authority. And that's the ultimate protection, is when customers are loyal to your brand. And again, if you need to protect that brand or that name, then you've got to go through the legal machinations to do that. But that's the ultimate, is when you've got some form of customer preference that is seeking you out or loyal to you in some way.
And I want to point out, if anyone has any questions throughout, put them in the chat, because we're going to address them after each of these individual interviews. So put them in the chat and we will address them. But John, I want to hear, when Built to Sell, you talk about these 8 key drivers. You just mentioned one of them, right? Monopoly control, which is how well differentiated your business is. Are there any other at play here? Because you dug a little bit deep with him on the dependency on Amazon.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that was one that admittedly Ben sort of talked about as a double-edged sword, because Amazon, obviously this juggernaut growing like stink, it was a double-edged sword in the fact that it helped him scale the business very quickly in 3 years to 4 million pounds. At the same time, it was becoming more and more of a dependency issue. And so we refer to this thing called the Switzerland structure, where your dependency on a single employee, customer, or supplier, in this case, a platform supplier, if you will, can lead to knock off in your valuation. It can lead to a drop in your valuation because acquirers figure that you're going to be too risky, and that if Amazon were to change its algorithm or delist you or whatever, and they've been they've been accused of doing that, of course. If Amazon, if you're selling on Amazon, they're going to make you provide Amazon customers the lowest price, and if they see you selling the product through another channel at a lower price, in many cases you run the risk of getting delisted. And so when 90% of your revenue comes from Amazon, you're not doing anything to disrupt the apple cart. But at the same time, you live in constant fear that Amazon will change their algorithm, change their search functionality, et cetera. And so it was, again, a double-edged sword. One of the things I learned about Amazon from Ben was what Amazon uses to serve up the search rankings, because I thought it was all 5-star ratings. I assumed
I love
that the
this
search
part of the interview. Yeah, where you dug a little bit.
It was so fascinating. Yeah, because I naively, I've never sold anything on Amazon, maybe with the exception of books. I thought the search algorithm in Amazon was determined by the 5-star review. In fact, that is part of the algorithm, apparently. But another 2 factors that are important are your add to cart ratio. So the number of times your product appears in the search listings compared to the number of times it then gets added to a cart. That's one key metric that drives your search rankings. The other is your conversion rate. So when it gets into your cart, what proportion of the time does that cart holder check out? And those 2 things are much more important, apparently, to the algorithm than simply your 5-star rating. And I think that was kind of an interesting nuance to this interview. But again, it speaks to how much science there is behind the algorithm and how vulnerable, effectively, Ben became to the machinations and the idiosyncrasies of the Amazon search results. And I think that ultimately led to what was a relatively modest multiple for his company. He was turning over 4 million UK pounds at the time of the exit, and he sold the business for, if memory serves, around 3 times profit, which, again, Ben's a young guy. He'll go on to have tremendous success in lots of other businesses, but it's a relatively small multiple for a great brand. Had he built the brand and successfully built the brand through other channels, if he'd had retail distribution, for example, or a tremendous .com direct-to-consumer brand marketplace, you could see a Reebok or a Nike coming along and gobbling him up for a much larger multiple. And so it's this kind of double-edged sword I think entrepreneurs need to think through, is that if you connect to a platform, it can help you grow very quickly, yet it can also undermine your Switzerland structure score, which can ultimately detract from the value of your company. So it's this sort of trying to balance these 2 ideas in place. You want to grow to improve the value of your company, but at the same time, if you become too dependent on a single channel, it can become a problem.
John, last time when we talked the other month, I loved hearing some of your ideas overlaid on the subscription models. So some of the interviews don't necessarily have a subscription model, but I know in the automatic customer, that's what you talk about. So for this one, or for all of them, I want to hear what subscription models are at play so people kind of recognize them, and maybe other ones, some ideas of maybe what you would overlay on if you're advising a company, what they can consider as adding a subscription model onto this, if it applies.
In the case of Beast Gear, I think there would be a natural kind of line extension to do some sort of protein supplement, some sort of supplements because again, that is a consumable, meaning customers who take protein powder before a workout, for example, they do that every workout, and therefore you could create a subscription, and many supplement companies have done that all the way up to GNC. So I think Beast Gear was a hardware company. It was skipping ropes and weightlifting.
I'm not needing a new rope every month,
Yeah, you're not exactly. Once you bought one of the high quality that Beast Gear was, you don't need them. But you could take the brand equity, the Instagram following that they had, and say, okay, we've developed a formula for pre-workout, which is what weightlifters take before a big workout, or protein powder for, recovery, et cetera. So I could see that being an interesting line extension for those guys.
The smart idea. Yeah, I like that. And then the last is The Art of Selling Your Business, the book, and kind of the roadmap for harvesting. And so when we're talking about getting down to some of the negotiation or what happened at the end, anything to, I think he had a 40% earnout in 2 years or something of that nature. Anything to point out on that part?
Not a lot. I mean, again, when it came to the sale of the company, the biggest insight for me was the relatively muted valuation multiple. Again, a 4 million pound company trading at 3 times profit feels a little skinny to me, but again, it was 90% of his revenue was coming from Amazon. So it's easy for me to play Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, you should have created other channels. It's really difficult. Once you get on the Amazon train, as I said earlier, you can't sell off Amazon at a lower price. Amazon's very picky about you trying to create a direct relationship with their customers, for example, and can delist you. So I think Ben did a great job. I mean, he got in as a young guy, built a great company over 3 or 4 years, sold it for a decent price, and he'll go on to have his second and his third and his fourth business, and he'll learn a ton. And again, I think that's one of the kind of transferable takeaways from his story. We talk about, and other people have referred to it as training wheels businesses, and I find that it's obviously a pejorative kind of term, but it refers to, in many cases, your first business is really where you kind of work out some of the kinks. and if we hold those companies too long, like if you start a business in your 20s and you're still holding it in your 50s, you have to ask, like, could you not take what you learned and parlay that into a better, more valuable company? I think in many cases we stick with businesses because we could become inert. Inertia takes over, and businesses okay, and it's paying our lifestyle, and things are good, and yet it's not a juggernaut. And in many cases, we'd be better off kind of wrapping that up in a tidy little bow, selling that company, taking what we've learned and investing that into a new company. And I think Ben will do that in this case. He'll go build another brand off Amazon, and it'll be a tremendous success.
Yeah, totally. I love it. I'm going to get to the next one. If there's any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll take them as they come in. So I'm watching for that. And so the next one, John, was Wes Matthews. All right. Wes Matthews built High Level Marketing, digital advertising agency. He built it to $6.5 million in annual revenue, and it was thriving. COVID hit, and he's like, well, I have 49 staff. There's a lot of risk here. And basically he received an email at that time that from Todd Taskey that he decided to engage with. And so I'd love for you to talk about Wes's story and some of the points that you think would be most important.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big ones in any service company is getting off the hourly or daily billing hamster wheel, right? And I think Wes did an amazing job of that. He created a subscription model where they did digital advertising. And so they had their customers who were investing in digital advertising sign up for a subscription. So in and of itself, that's not necessarily that novel, but I think it's a cool application of the recurring revenue model for sure. They kind of subscribe to an ongoing set of advertising services from High Level Marketing. What I thought was really interesting is he charged a setup fee for access to his proprietary platform. And this is what we refer to at Value Builder as a sunk money consumable. Let me try to give you an example. When you sink money into a platform, like when you buy a razor, from Gillette, for example, it obviously makes you loyal to those blades. If you buy, and you're a Wall Street trader, a Bloomberg terminal, the physical piece of hardware that you sit on your desk and the keyboard, you're going to be much more loyal, obviously, to the information that Bloomberg sells you on subscription. That's referred to as a sunk money subscription, where you're making an upfront investment in a platform. And Wes, I think, knew that intuitively or learned that. And so he charged his customers a setup fee to set up their platform, the proprietary platform that High Level Marketing used to serve up these ads. And I think it was brilliant because it makes the customer invest. And when they invest, they onboard better, they bet in better. Ultimately, Wes got an 88% retention rate on his customers. And again, and if we have to think about that, that may not sound dramatic for a lot of people, but we have to think about that in the context of the industry Wes was in. He was in the fickle advertising industry, and there is probably no more fickle space than marketing. Right?
What have you done for me lately?
Yeah, what have you done for me lately? Brand comes in, new marketing director comes in, blow out the marketing agency, bring in someone new, et cetera. Yet he had 88% revenue retention rate year over year. And that just becomes this massive platform of revenue that gives him confidence to build and grow and invest in the company. So, and again, I think part of the secret sauce here was not only the recurring model he used, but also that sunk money investment they made in getting access to the proprietary platform Wes had built. I just think it's a great business.
So, John, I wanted to get your thoughts on the part where there was double an acquisition offer without pushing the buyer away. There was a part where he kind of goes into, they come back with an offer, he did not like it, and that there was a whole exchange there. So I wanted to hear, maybe, you've probably heard thousands of times people handling these situations differently.
I think what for me was the big takeaway around the negotiation was that at one point Wes did walk away. And I mean, there's an old saying among M&A professionals, I can't remember the exact wording, but effectively it says that at some point in the negotiation to sell your business, everybody has a walk away moment, right? Everybody walks away from the table and says, enough is enough. I'm not going to kind of be pushed any further, and they leave. And then lo and behold, if the acquirer is serious and you still have a modicum of interest, someone will make another move, and the parties will kind of come together. And that happened to Wes. I mean, he was negotiating in good faith, back and forth, and eventually he kind of just was pushed too far on some deal term, and I can't remember what deal point it was, but he said, you know what, I don't think this is right. And he walked away. And that's, I think, look, it can be a dangerous tactic. Obviously, you can overplay your hand doing that if you do it too early in the negotiation, if you do it before the acquirer is really invested in buying your business, then clearly that can blow up in your face. But if used, I think, strategically and at the right time in the negotiation, I think it can work, and it did work for Wes. Again, I think what you want to make sure is that the acquirer has made a significant investment in the deal. We think about the deal from the seller's point of view all the time. That's kind of what we do. But the buyer also makes an investment, right? So they make an investment, they learn about your company, they might do some due diligence, which costs them a lot of money, maybe themselves or with a third party. In a lot of cases, a corporate development person, if it's a big organization, will have to pitch the idea of buying your company to their board or their CEO. And so they not only spend time, but they also spend kind of relationship capital to say, look, I think we should buy this business. I think I can get it for X multiple, and I think it's great for these three strategic reasons. They're, as a corporate finance professional, they're going out on a limb, staking their reputation to get a deal done. And so the more the deal goes along, the more kind of investment, both in capital, time, as well as relationship equity that acquirer is making in the deal, the more they become vested in getting a deal done. And the more, in a funny way, you might have a little bit of walk-away leverage, because it's not just a superficial look at your company that they haven't invested time in. They're deep into six figures of time and money by the time that you're into due diligence. You might argue you've got a little bit more leverage at that point to say, hey, stop pushing me around.
I'm wondering if it's common. There was a point in there, and I know in the negotiation, a lot of times people have a individual that's buffering both sides. And there was kind of a pivotal point where the other CEO called Wes directly. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that, if that's common. And that kind of, I think, turned Wes around when you were discussing it with him on the interview.
Yeah, I think, again, highly common. So in this case, Todd Taskey, the M&A professional representing Wes, did a great job. He negotiated the whole deal, was the glue that made the thing kind of come together. But Todd gets to kind of ride off into the sunset, right? At the end of the deal, Todd gets to shake everybody's hand, go out for a closing dinner, and then leave. And the two parties, Wes and the owner, the CEO of the acquiring company, need to find a way to work together. And at some point, having an intermediary can actually give people less a confidence. Like, I really need to kind of look into the eyes of the acquirer and know that I'm, they're going to honor what they're saying. And so I think that was strategically wise on behalf of the CEO of the acquiring company to pick up the phone and call Wes when he was feeling, when he had cold feet. Now, look, I think that can blow up for CEOs if they're too quick to try to work around the M&A professional, because the M&A professional, rightly so, will feel like, hey, stop, going around my back to my customer. If you want to talk to this deal, talk to me. I'm the representative. But at some point, when the deal starts to fall apart, or the tension rises to a certain point, one strategic phone call can make a big difference. And I think Wes was certainly turned around by that call from the CEO saying, hey, I get it, I understand where you're at, and take the time you need to make this decision right for you.
Yeah, that is that art and science. And essentially, it's not like Wes was going to walk away either. I'm sure some people sell their company and then they kind of wash their hands, but he was going to stay on and work with this company. So it had to be something where the relationship was solid.
Absolutely.
So we have the key drivers. You mentioned the recurring revenue piece, the subscription models. I mean, that's kind of part of this of why it was so valuable, because they did have the recurring revenue in place. And then we did talk about the art of selling, kind of the negotiation part. Or anything else with this particular interview that surprised you, or that there are any other observations?
One kind of qualitative thing is I love Wes. I love interviews like Wes, because he's kind of he's a sales guy. He's a guy you could share, like, have a beer with on a patio. I mean, he's like a real dude, and it's fun to talk to people like that, because they didn't go to Harvard, or didn't they're not like marred in some Excel spreadsheet and analytically thinking about all the day. Like, he's a guy's guy, if you can use that term. I don't mean to be gender specific, but do you know what I mean? Like, he's just one of those people that you look in the eyes and you shake his hand, and he kind of says what he's going to do, and so forth. And it's this personality type that struck me as being, there's such a variety of CEOs and founders of businesses that there is no one personality type. Like, Wes is he's a backslapping, beer drinking kind of guy, and I mean that in a really favorable way. As and then you go to even Ben is from Beast Gear, a much less sort of boisterous kind of personality, much more measured, perhaps more analytical, thoughtful. And it just struck me at that time of just, there are these very divergent personality types. Sometimes we talk about non-technical founders in technology businesses, right? Which means that they're good at sales, they're good at business development, but they don't know how to code. And then you got technical founders, right, who are really good on the technical front, but God, you couldn't possibly sell their way out of a paper bag. And it's why sometimes you have a partnership in a technology company. So you've got a sort of front person and a technology person. In the case of Wes, he was clearly the front person, and he had a behind the scenes person. It was his partner in the business who was a real technical person who built the proprietary platform, et cetera. It's just a good reminder that, first of all, oftentimes two-person founding teams are more successful than one. It's statistically, you can look at the success rate of teams that have multiple founders, they tend to build more successful businesses than those who build them on their own. And secondly, that no matter what personality you have, whether you're quiet and analytical or you're really kind of upfront and personal, you can build a successful business. And so that was another sort of qualitative thing I took away from that.
John, you spark my memory. You bring up one of my favorite parts of the whole interview, which I was on the edge of my seat when you asked this question. Okay. You asked him, what's the risk of the CTO that they could leave after getting enough money, right? Because there is a risk there that he's built this with the CTO, and you asked him that, and I was just on the edge of my seat waiting to hear what he was going to say, because it's a risk if the CTO gets paid enough. Well, I'm out, thanks guys, but they helped build this company, and that person's an asset as well. So I'm wondering what made you ask that question, and if there's any thoughts around how he ended up, responding to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can become held hostage by your employees. It happens when you've got one employee who's really important to the operations of the business. Again, when we go back to Switzerland structure, the driver we referred to earlier, it's a dependency on any one customer, employee, or supplier. Employee can be equally problematic. In this case, his CTO was not just an employee; they were also a founder, co-founder of the company. So they had equity in the business, and so that keeps them loyal, I think, and makes them less susceptible to just leaving on a dime. However, it does mean that the CTO could turn around and say, hold on a second, I want more shares because I'm a more important player. I want more salary. I want more vacation. I mean, they can start to hold or lord that power over you if you don't have something that they don't have. In the case of Wes, what made that relationship work is he was a great front guy. He was an amazing salesperson, a great client person, was able to bring in the business. And so his CTO knew that he would be nothing without Wes, and Wes nothing without him. So there was a mutual dependency that worked in that case. I think you ideally want to make sure that you're bringing some unique skill set to the table that is valued in the overall equation. I think that's probably the best partnerships. I mean, we could all go back down the list of partnerships that blow up because you've got two, very sales-oriented partners, and neither can take the back. They're so narcissistic. Neither can take a back seat to the other, and it blows up. In this case, it worked because I think they had very different yet complementary skill sets.
Yeah, but I could totally see if someone gets life-changing money, their priorities may change, right? I mean, they may go, listen, I want to go sit on a beach a lot of entrepreneurs, they would go there for a week and then be like, okay, I'm tired of this, and they'll want to keep going. But that struck me. I love that question that I encourage people to go check out that episode on Built to Sell Radio, because that part in itself, I think was golden. And so any questions, put them in the chat. We'll address them as they come in. And the next is Marc Elkman. And this was interesting, John, because he built Fresh Meal Plan, which is a meal delivery service for healthy eaters, and he built it to $20 million in just 3 years. He was in his 20s, by the way. So, and he was on the Inc. 500 list of fastest growing companies. He caught the attention of New Heights Capital, a private equity group that focused on fitness, and then acquired the controlling interest in Fresh Meal Plan. And he still has a minority stake, but I love for you to talk about, and he was pretty open in this about some things he would have done differently in the deal. But what struck you in Marc's story?
Man, there's so much in the story. He's in this space that it seems like is just exploding right now, which is this sort of food tech space where it's the marriage or merger of food and technology. In this case, obviously, Fresh Meal Plan was a meal delivery service. He had the unique angle that they were really focused on athletes and people who wanted to eat healthy, yet didn't have time to make their own healthy food, so they'd sign up for a meal plan. One of the things that struck me in this interview was both his historical growth rate as well as his potential growth. And one of the kind of drivers of your company's value is going to be your growth potential. So making the case to an acquirer that you've only scratched the surface of what is possible, that thinking a bit of a farming analogy, that you've sort of harvested kind of an acre of land, but there's another 100 acres that you could go, harvest as the acquirer. That's a really important conversation to have. And I think many of us as entrepreneurs are tempted to build to the very height of the business where we've sort of harvested 95% of the potential and then go sell the company. And that's almost always a problem, because again, an acquirer is going to be looking at this business and say, great, I'm going to spend a truckload in buying this business. I want to know there's a huge upside growth potential. And so I think Marc did a really good job of making the case that there was a ton of growth potential left. And here's how he did it. He had as his distribution channel gyms. He was a personal trainer himself and had a lot of relationships with gyms in South Florida. And so he went to the gym owners and said, look, all your gym members are spending all this time lifting weights, working out cardio, whatever. What's really going to have an impact for them is coupling that with really good eating. Eating well is, you can't outrun the fork. It's going to make a whole lot more difference than all this cardio they're doing. And he made the case to the gym owners that they should let him provide free samples at these gyms. And so he would set up a little table at these gyms, and customers were coming in and out after their workout, and Wes would give them a sampling of what they would get in one of his meal plans. And lo and behold, they signed up a ton of new subscribers from this sort of free sampling or demoing event at gyms. Well, it was so successful that some of the other competitors of Fresh Meal Plan got wind of the strategy and started doing it themselves. And so Marc had to up the ante again. He started paying the gyms a small sort of stipend or success bonus, if you will, for each new subscriber he signed up through their gym. So they had some skin in the game as well. And it was a great sort of strategy, and it had tremendous growth potential, because Marc estimated that he'd signed up 5% of the gyms in the United States. He built the company to $20 million in revenue. So, I mean, it was not an insignificant company. They were $20 million in revenue, yet only 5% of the gyms had been tapped, meaning there were 95% left to go sign up these agreements with. And I think that was what, for me, was noteworthy about this story, because it just suggested there's so much more growth potential. And again, that's the case I think entrepreneurs need to make, is that they haven't plowed the entire field, that there's a ton of field left to go plow.
There was a part that you uncovered in the interview, John, about some of the key relationships he had in the industry. And so I wanted to talk about that and how important that was in ultimately, getting to a deal, I guess.
Yeah, he early connected, and I can't remember how he connected with the founder of Orange Theory. I'm thinking Orange Theory is the name of the...
Yeah, Orange Theory, yeah.
Yeah, just absolute juggernaut in the personal fitness space.
Huge.
Yeah, I've never actually been in one. Have you ever been in one?
No. I've seen them all over Chicago, but I've not been in one.
I've seen them all over as well, but I've actually never been in one, so I'm speaking completely out of hand even talking about them. But Marc built a relationship with the founder of Orange Theory, and the founder of Orange Theory said, look, I want you to do the catering for all of the launch events for Orange Theories in Florida. So every time Orange Theory was starting a new location, Marc's team was there sampling fresh meal plans. Well, guess what? As again, rising tide lifts all boats. As Orange Theory took off, so too did Fresh Meal Plan by default. And so that became an important relationship. It was the founder who actually sold his company, the founder of Orange Theory, if memory serves, to the private equity group that ultimately bought Marc Elkman's company, Fresh Meal Plan. So these things served Marc in both an operational sort of way, but also ultimately in his exit.
I want you to talk about gut feelings, okay? Because there was a point in time for Marc that he had a gut feeling there was friction and there was some tension. Yeah. And how do you decipher, okay, is this just cold feet, me selling my company, or is this actually friction and tension that I'm going to maybe look back on this deal and want to make some changes?
Yeah, so the friction I think you're referring to is part of the negotiation at the sort of final hour of the negotiation. They were going back and forth. I think the deal got retraded a few times. Retrading, of course, when an acquirer agrees to a certain price and a letter of intent, and then after due diligence lowers the price. I think he was retraded on, if memory serves, a few times. And so after the second or third time, I think Mark was like, hold on a second, like, do we have a deal or not? Are we going to do this or not? And he just kind of felt like the acquirer was sort of a moving target, and his gut was, nah, this doesn't feel right. I feel like I'm kind of getting the short end here of the stick. And I think he made the mistake, and I think I'm not telling tales out of school. I think he shared on the episode that he sort of made the mistake of saying, well, I'm sure it'll be better after they acquire us. And it's kind of like the parents who are, or the couple who are, struggling in their marriage and think, oh, well, if we have a kid, it'll all be better. Well, of course, that's the worst thing you can do.
That's like the last thing that happens. You could see the satisfaction rate. There's some chart, John, it's like for parents, until the kid reaches 18, like that satisfaction then goes back to like normal. But until then, the satisfaction it's a lot of stress. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you think your marriage is on the rocks before having kids, try having kids. The same thing is true of a business relationship, I believe. And that's why I think, personally, I think acquirers do themselves a tremendous disservice by illegitimate retrading. Look, let's be clear. Retrading, when an acquirer lowers its offer after committing to a price in a letter of intent, has two flavors. There is legitimate retrading, which happens when a seller doesn't represent truthfully the state of their company, or takes their eye off the ball during the negotiation process, so much so that the results of the company start to diminish. And that's, in my view, legitimate. I mean, if you agree to buy a business that is A, and then you turn around 60 days later and learn out it's A minus 20%, I think it's fair to retrade on that deal. Illegitimate retrading is where you take the acquirer's emotional commitment to the deal, the seller's emotional commitment to getting a deal done. You know that they have emotionally sold their company. They've told their spouse, they bought the ski house, they've emotionally committed, and you take that knowledge and you effectively lower your price for no other reason other than they've gotten committed to the deal. And that's illegitimate retrading, I think, in my mind. And I think when you get a whiff of illegitimate retrading, that they're using strategic timing, they're delaying getting back to you for no other reason other than it's just drawing out the process. I think that's when you need to kind of call a spade and say, I'm reminded of Barry Hinckley, which was an interview I did. Oh gosh, I think in year one of Built to Sell Radio, you could Google Built to Sell Radio Barry Hinckley and find it pretty quickly. But he taught me the no retrading handshake, and I said, what on earth is that? Yeah, what on earth is that? And he said you go through the entire negotiation, you get to letter of intent, you go through back and forth, you agree to the letter of intent, and before you sign it, you get up from the conference table, you walk over to the most senior person in the room from the acquirer's side, and you put out your hand and you say, I will do this deal on one condition. The acquirer says, what's the condition? You say, no retrading. And by telegraphing your knowledge of retrading, that you understand what it is, that you're not a neophyte newbie seller, that you've been around the block, that you know this illegitimate retrading happens, you are in many ways eliminating 90% of the retrading, because the acquirer will often say, okay, the gig is up. This guy knows the game, or this gal knows the game, and right. We're not going to get away with a lot of retrading. And I think it always sort of sticks with me as a great tactic to telegraph to an acquirer that you're not a new seller.
Yeah, I would add a word to Barry's, because of what you said, is instead of saying retrading, say, as long as we don't do any illegitimate retrading, right? Because
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I love that. Yeah, that's great. So With Mark, there were some things he said he would have done differently, and he said, I don't know if I would have done that deal if I knew I would have lost control over decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also.
So the backstory, I mean, this is a really cautionary story. I think if you're thinking of selling to a private equity group, I think it's worth listening to Mark's story, because what happened was that I think I can't remember the exact amount, but it's pretty common that you sell sort of 60% of your shares, 70% of your shares, sort of a majority, but enough left in the company to make it hurt. And that's what Mark did. He sold the majority of his shares, but not all of his shares. And I can't remember if it was 30 or 40%, but a significant chunk of his equity or his money was rolled into a new entity where he became a minority shareholder in his company that he founded. And after a couple of years, he was removed as the CEO of that company, and now he is on the sidelines, still a shareholder theoretically. But I say theoretically because is there any liquidity to those shares? Well, maybe or maybe not. The acquirer needs to want to sell that company. Mark can't force them to sell their shares to him, force his sale of his shares to them, and therefore he's sort of stuck without decision-making authority in a business he no longer controls, and can't really decide when they want to take it to market, and when they do, doesn't really control how that deal gets done. And so it's one of the downsides, I think, of selling to a private equity group and rolling a big chunk of your equity along. Look, I think it can work out tremendously well. And we've had examples. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head, but she started a veterinary clinic, sold to private equity group.
Lee Richter.
What's that?
Lee Richter, I think it was.
Lee Richter is her name. So you can Google Lee Richter Built to Sell Radio and hear the story. But she doubled her money in like a year or two from leaving some equity with the private equity group. So it can work out just the opposite. It can work out tremendously well. But for Mark, I think that it ended up being a disappointment in the sense that he was removed as the CEO and ultimately removed as an operator from the business altogether. And now he's sort of left with this big chunk of his wealth tied to a company he no longer controls. So I think that's the potential downside of a PE deal.
Yeah, that's what I love about all these interviews, John, is they take the different twists and turns. All of them are different, and all of them take a different path. And I want to encourage anyone to put questions in the chat. And that's also, if you're listening to this on the actual podcast, attend the webinar so you can ask questions, right? So make sure you register to the webinar so you can ask questions.
Yeah. The way to do that, by the way, Jeremy, we should just make sure people know, if you're listening to the podcast, just head over to builttosell.com and opt in. There's like 1,000 ways you can opt in, but basically there's a free gift package that we provide. When you opt in, you'll get an invitation to this webinar once a month. And so that's an opportunity to kind of ask questions to the extent that you have them live and be part of the live studio audience.
Yeah. So sign up for their email newsletter and get all the goodies. And so before we go to Mike Agugliaro, which was also a really interesting story, let me know if there's anything that surprised you, anything else about this. We covered some of the 8 key drivers. We covered some of the, the subscription models you talk about, automatic customer, and we talked about the art of selling your business and a lot of the negotiation overlay with this. Is there anything else in this particular case with Mark that surprised you or that we should talk about?
No, I think we've nailed the high points.
All right. So Mike Agugliaro. Now, this was really interesting. He's an electrician by trade, and over 12 years built gold medal service to $700,000. Now, one day his business partner comes in. He's like, "I'm done. I'm quitting." Mike talks him back into the business, and they then go off and grow it to $32 million in revenue, and they end up selling it. I think at 5 times EBITDA multiple.
Yeah, I think I got a premium on 5. Actually, he said they sold at a significant premium on 5.
Premium over. Oh, got it.
Yeah.
So what sticks out to you with Mike's story?
Gosh, there's so much about this story that sticks out. I mean, one of the things one of the things I hear a lot from new entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs or students, young people, is they'll say, I really want to be an entrepreneur, but I just don't have an idea yet. And I think I kind of want to tell them to go listen to Mike's story, because Mike's an electrician, right? Like, he started an electrical company. First of all, he was an apprentice, worked for a company that said, like, I don't need to work for anybody, I'll do it myself. And the Starbucks, there were coffee shops before Starbucks, amazingly, and yet we all have, know the success of Starbucks. I think having an idea is a bit of a cop-out, frankly. I think there 99% execution, 1% inspiration. I think it's true. I think you can create an incredible business, as Mike did, in virtually any category. It doesn't have to be sexy. I mean, Mike was plumbing people's toilets. He was, electrical. It was HVAC. It was not sexy stuff. And so that's for me one thing that always struck me. The other, really, I think, is I asked him, what was the difference between the first 12 years when you grew it to $700,000 in revenue? So a modest success, but took a long time to get there. And the next tranche of time where you went from $700,000 to $32 million, like that's a big jump. Something must have changed. And he really talked about becoming a student of marketing. And I think this is a key lesson for a lot of entrepreneurs. I think it's fair to say, I don't know, you've done a lot of interviews, Jeremy, so you could probably chime in as well, but I think it's fair to say that most entrepreneurs have a pretty good knack for marketing. They're good at marketing their services, selling their services, business development. That skill set tends to be pretty well honed, and I think it is in Mike's case for sure. And I think we run the risk. We actually refer to this at Value Builder as the Rainmaker's Dilemma. We run the risk of overusing that skill set and relying on it for too long. And so I think in Mike's case, he didn't hire salespeople. He didn't invest in marketing. I mean, he was the guy, right? I mean, you wanted your electrical done, you called Mike and he would come fix it all up. And that was, like, he was proud of that. Ultimately, though, most Rainmakers businesses do reach a plateau. Sometimes it happens at $500,000 in revenue. In Mike's case, it happened at $700,000, where your greatest skill or your greatest asset, your salesmanship or salespersonship, to make it gender neutral, becomes also your greatest weakness, because you're not investing in marketing and you reach this plateau. And so I think that was, for me, one of the most clear examples of the Rainmaker's Dilemma playing out. And so they got together and decided to become real students of marketing. Do you remember the part where Mike's wife looked at a bunch of color analysis?
That was a great part. Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah.
Now all I do is I see those colors around the internet or around, right, because of when you were talking to him. So I'll let you tell the story, because I love this part.
Yeah, so they're on this journey to really understand marketing and invest in marketing. And Mike's wife went out and did some color analysis to figure out what color they should paint their vans. Because, of course, HVAC companies and home services companies, like, that's a big part of their sort of marketing efforts, is their rolling billboards, which are their vans that drive around town. And so she did a bunch of analysis. She looked at orange, red, green, all etc. And she found out that apparently, there's some history behind this, that apparently yellow and black are the ultimate combination of colors that make you stand out effectively. And again, his idea, or the research said that it's actually comes to us through sort of evolution, that we have evolved to look out for the yellow and black of the wasps coloring.
Totally,
Wasps,
the bees and the wasps.
Yellow and black.
We're changing all colors of built to sell to yellow and black from now. No.
Yeah, it's good. Like, now we're going to scrap the blue. It's all yellow and black. Anyways, long story short, I haven't validated whether from an evolutionary perspective, yellow and black are the reason.
We've not looked in the research with this disclaimer.
No, we've not looked into the double-blind survey on that, but it does point to the kind of level of investment they made and investment of time and sort of research they put into really becoming students of marketing. Anyways, long story short, they painted their vans yellow and black, and that became a huge part of their marketing. They were all over New Jersey. They were noteworthy. People talked about them, right? And that was just one of the many tactics they used to really invest in marketing, and I think kind of get them out of the owners, that kind of rainmaker's dilemma.
Yeah, there was two. I think at the time they had two vans, and people were like, "Oh, I see you all over the place, all over the city." And like, well, we have two vans, but that was after, like you said, they painted them yellow and black. So there's something to it, I guess.
I think they grew to like 80 vans or something like that. I mean, it became a significant $32 million in revenue. There were a lot of vans on the road. Yes.
There was another question I love when you asked, and you said, Mike was kind of on his own from a young age, and he had a lot of grit because he had to survive on his own. And you asked him, your kids are growing up with you being successful. How do you instill grit in your kids? And I loved this part of the interview.
Yeah, it's the age-old question because, and I've asked this question a few times because I do find it, in particular for parents, it is a really tricky territory to navigate. Everything's available on the internet now, right? So you sell your company, and it is not long before your kids find out, and your kids guess. Maybe they don't find out the number, but they can probably guess or back into the fact that you've created some sort of life-changing event for your family. And it does, I think, trigger this issue of like, are my kids going to be motivated? Will they lose determination because they know mom or dad have a bunch of money in the bank? And I think it's a real thing to navigate. I don't know that I have any pearls of wisdom.
I'm just curious what answers you've seen across some of the people. I mean, there's no right or wrong. Everyone handles it differently. But what's kind of the myriad of answers you've seen, and maybe in Mike's case or any case that would be interesting to talk about here, because it's totally a personal decision how you. I mean, even I think Warren Buffett. There's information out there on how Warren Buffett handles his wealth with his kids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's Buffett's famous for saying enough to do anything, not enough to do nothing is his philosophy to passing money down to his kids. So enough to do anything, meaning I'll finance any sort of fancy education you want. I'll support you to do what it is that you want to go do, but I'm not going to give you so much that you can do nothing. And I think Mike, in his case, I think did something similar in the sense that he has gotten his kids off and they're starting their own companies. They're doing entrepreneurial things, and so he's sort of imparted those life lessons on them. And again, this is a controversial topic, so I don't want to get myself in too much trouble. But I'm not a huge fan of passing businesses on to kids. That's, to me, this is a very personal thing. But for me, I want my kids to have their own identity. I want them to feel when they're successful, it's because they did something well, not because their dad gave them something or provided something. So I don't want to take that away from them. And so I think the problem with passing down a business to your kids is, I think, look, on one level, your kid may take that opportunity and be like, damn it, I'm going to prove to my mom or dad that I'm worthy. And I remember Ted Rogers, who was a big cable magnate in Canada, has the kind of Time Warner of Canada, and like on his deathbed, he revealed that he was still trying to prove to his dad that he was worthy of his attention. This is a man who on his deathbed was worth billions of dollars, and was asked, sort of, where does the motivation come from? His dad died in his 40s. Like, it had been decades and decades that his dad had passed away, but he said, well, I guess on some level, I'm just still trying to prove that I'm worthy. And I thought, wow, what an incisive comment from a billionaire on his deathbed, that he's still insecure because he was given his fledgling father's business. At the time, it was like one radio station. And so I think on one level, you could have a tremendously successful person who just always feels empty, not worthy, because they were given something. On the other level, we all know stories of people who are given too much and their lives go off the rails because they have no motivation, no sense of self-worth. And I just don't know how you thread the needle between those two outcomes. I think no matter what, you're going to end up in one of those buckets. And so for me, I'm just not a fan. Again, very personal decision, very controversial topic. I will admit that and acknowledge that up front, but I'm never going to pass a business down to my kids. I just don't see how it works. And so for Mike, I think he has imparted his kids with all the grit and determination and entrepreneurialism, but not with the keys to gold medal service. He sold the business, and I think that's an important nuance to his story.
Yeah. So, John, I know we're right at the end. So I want to give anyone a chance to ask any questions. As we wait for those questions, are there anything with, I don't know, maybe with Mike, maybe us just in general with any of them that stuck out to you as kind of an overarching theme or just something important we should leave people with?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with regards to Mike. One of the things that we know people often regret when they come to sell their business is the loss of a sense of identity. And I asked Mike about that. I said, was that difficult? And he said, it wasn't for me, but it was for my kids. And I said, tell me more about that. And he said, well, my kids grew up on the playground. When one of the yellow trucks drove by, the kids would say, hey, that's my dad's business. And that kind of filled them up with a sense of pride. Like, my dad had the trucks, the yellow and black trucks. And as the business grew and the yellow and black trucks became kind of ubiquitous around New Jersey, it gave the kids a sense of self-worth. And when he came home one night and said, yeah, I sold a business, it was the kids who had the toughest time with it. And I think that's really interesting. I've done 300 plus episodes of Built to Sell Radio. I've never heard that before. And so I thought that was an interesting sort of twist on the old, losing a sense of purpose when you sell your company. It may not just be you. It could be family members who may feel that loss of identity that comes with selling a company.
Totally. John, thank you. Thanks for having me. Everyone, check out more episodes on builttosell.com/radio. They're fantastic. I listen to all of them. And, thanks for having me, John.
Hey, it was fun, Jeremy. We'll do it again next month.
Hey, if you like today's episode, you're going to love my new book, The Art of Selling Your Business. The book was inspired by the cohort of my guests over the years who have been able to negotiate an exit far better than the benchmark in their industry, sometimes 2 or 3 times more than I would have expected. I was curious to understand the tactics and strategies of these entrepreneurs and what they do differently from average performers. The result is a playbook for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. To learn more, go to builttosell.com/selling. where we put together a collection of gifts for listeners who order the book. Just go to builttosell.com/selling. Built to Sell Radio is produced by Haley Parkhill. Our audio and video engineer is Dennis Labataglia. If you like what you've just heard, subscribe to get a new episode delivered to your inbox each week. Just go to builttosell.com.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/builttosell or on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.